I watched Smile 2, so you don't have to. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, I'm just gonna lay down the brass tacks and tell y'all what I thought about this movie. It's good. I loved the first Smile movie, and when I saw the trailer for the sequel, I didn't have the highest expectations. But the sequel is actually better than the original. You don't even have to see the first movie to understand the lore. Without exposition dumping, they were able to replicate the same magic as the original, but execute it better. It's shockingly impressive how they managed to make a good horror movie with Smile and come back again stronger with the sequel. It's like the Shrek of horror movies. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be making this video if it didn't have its flaws, but I want to make it clear, these issues do not take away from the quality of either films. However, it will impact the quality of the franchise going forward, which is very disappointing. Spoilers if you haven't seen the film, and yeah, let's dive right into the good, the bad, and the ugly with Smile 2. First and foremost, you have to understand that Smile is built around jump scares, which is probably the most overused tactic in all of horror. But the way Smile executes it is better than all the others, even FNAF, which to this day I'm still befuddled as to how they botched that movie. But anyways, the first Smile relied on jump scares, which were good for the most part. Smile 2 does the same thing, but executes them better by really building tension and emphasizing the psychological state of the protagonist effectively. It's very impressive how creative they get with some of the jump scares. You're actually watching the film hoping for a jump scare, and when it happens, you still don't even see it coming. Now, it's not like they reinvented the concept of jump scares or anything. They still use the standard loud, scary noise when executed, but it's just utilized more effectively. Another thing that makes this a great film is having an ensemble of characters who you actually care about. Anthology films and series are always a gamble because depending on how well the original performs, it can be hard to create a whole new set of characters that the audience will receive to the same level. Once again, Smile 2 does it better than the first. The characters are so well written, matched with an entourage of actors who bring them out to the fullest. Obviously, the best example is the protagonist, played by Naomi Scott. She has mastered so many acting techniques that really enhance the relatability of characters to the audience, such as crying on command. That single teardrop paired with a 1,000-yard stare through a slow telephoto zoom shot, you really feel the hopelessness and fear she's feeling being put into a peril situation. Following that, I want to glaze over Ray Nicholson's character. I f***ing thought Jack Torrance was back. That's probably the only criminal thing I could think of when talking about Smile 2, that he didn't have a more prominent role. He's someone from the protagonist, Sky Riley's past, who the entity uses to feed on her trauma. Most of the time he's on screen, he's portrayed as a piece of the entity, which, even from these scenes alone, really emphasizes the actor's ability to replicate classic horror techniques. We only get one scene of his character, at which is supposed to be a turning point during a flashback regarding Sky's trauma, and he sells it. He's a character you love to hate. I'm not saying they should, but if they ever remade The Shining, anything less than Ray Nicholson is unacceptable. I have faith he'll live up to his father's legacy. Now, the plot follows pretty much an identical storyline as the first one, basically beat for beat with a few changes that I wish they did more of. The best example is the film's intro. It follows Joel after the ending of the first movie, as he tries to pass on the entity to someone who deserves it before he inevitably dies. However, this scene is all one long continuous action shot like the movie 1917. I'm talking guns blazing, gang fights, knives out, blood and gore. It's incredible. I barely made it to the showing, and when I walked in, I had missed the previews, so I thought I walked into the wrong movie for a second. The opening was so different than the first Smile film, and it does tie into the overall narrative. I wish they had experimented more with scenes like this past the intro. So while I'm disappointed in that regard, I think it was a great way to open the movie and perfect conclusion to Joel's character. Now, diving into the rest of the plot, the story follows Sky Riley, who is a troubled pop star that went through some traumatic events in the past, has a history of substance abuse, and unfortunately, the entity latches onto her after she witnessed it kill her friend Lewis. That's not a huge spoiler, it was in the trailers, but sets up everything that happens next in the film. So now she's battling the Smile entity who's feeding on her trauma, and narratively, it borrows a lot of the same elements as the first movie, but given the status of the main character being this huge pop star, it puts a spin on it because unlike Rose in the first movie, Skye is always surrounded by people, whether it's family, friends, or fans. This allows for some really interesting scares that don't need certain horror movie cliches, such as always happening at night. Most of the scares in this film happen in broad daylight. Also, since I mentioned the intro, I have to give props to the cinematography of this movie. They did get some really creative shots and put a spin on the whole classic horror movie tropes, which works because a large part of Smile is playing with people's perception of reality. It's always changing. The entity latches onto the mind of its victims, and as you watch, you experience what the characters are going through as you yourself try to figure out what's real or not, the flow of time, all that hoopla. Lastly, I have to glaze the sound design. I think the use of it in Smile 2 is really good and definitely kept the audience engaged. But the audio was so fucking loud. I saw this in a standard showing, so maybe it was just the speakers being shit, but it gave me a bit of a headache afterwards. Or maybe it's because I have autism for brains. I don't know. Like I said, the sound design is good, but I wish they fixed the levels with the internal audio. There's a scene where Lewis throws a sword, and it sounds like somebody had just fired a few rounds at some glass. Sure, horror-wise, it's great for an unintentional jump scare, but there's no reason for the audio levels to be as loud as they were. Minor audio complaints aside, I believe Smile 2 was just a really solid film, and I thought it was great. But now I have to complain about a few things. Hands down, my biggest problem with this film was the ending. Without exaggeration, it was probably the most predictable ending you would imagine, knowing the protagonist is a pop star. I called it when the trailer dropped, and as I was watching this film and enjoying myself, I prayed they wouldn't go down that path. But they did. It's going to be really hard to explain this without spoilers, but I'm going to try my best and let y'all piece it together if you haven't figured it out already. So, in the last 5 or so minutes, the movie ends with Pandora's box being opened. This is a trope that has been done hundreds of times, and it's not any better with Smile. The only thing they do better is its execution narratively, that being because the protagonist is a pop star. And if you still need more clues as to what I'm talking about, or don't care about spoilers, everyone else skip the next 10 or so seconds of the video. Alright, so imagine if the opening of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour ended with everyone who was there killing themselves a week later, and then the same thing happens for every person who was there, and so on. Conceptually, I get it's a strong conclusion, but it was less than satisfying, and they tried so hard to make it seem like it was some big twist, which it wasn't. Even the protagonist knew what would happen if she performed with the entity affecting her. I would have preferred if she succeeded initially, only to go down a different path that led to the same destination. Basically, a different cause, but resulted in the same effect. And I think the writers were playing around that idea. The last 5 minutes of the film ends abruptly. Like there was supposed to be an additional scene or two that got cut last minute. There is a scene in the trailer where Skye performs in front of an audience, and at the end of her big number, everyone in the audience is smiling. That never happens. Maybe it's because the film was already over 2 hours long, which may be standard runtime for most movies in this day and age, but not so much with horror. Regardless, however, the ending of the sequel nullifies one of the most crucial aspects that Smile was built on going forward. This isn't really a spoiler if you've seen the original, but what you need to know is the entity is pretty much unstoppable, except it has one weakness. Only the person who witnessed the death of the previous host gets affected by the curse, thus becoming the new host. Outside of that, every possible means to defeat it is still theoretical, or at least it was. With Pandora's box being opened, it takes away the aspect of nobody else understanding what's happening to the person being affected, along with the mystery and lack of information regarding the entity going forward. Also, regarding the Smile entity itself, this isn't a new complaint, just a rehashed old one. When it finally kills its host, that's when we finally see its physical body, being this giant CGI skinless flesh monster that looks like a knockoff of the Mind Flayer in Season 3 of Stranger Things. The CGI for the entity was bad in the first movie, and just as bad in the sequel. All of these things and accommodation just really take away the impact of the ending. Like, if the movie had ended and it was all a dream, it was just a letdown. It certainly doesn't take away from the quality of the movie, as everything up until the last 5 minutes was so great, and narratively it was a strong conclusion from a plot perspective, but not so much on a viewing perspective. I think Smile is one of the best franchises we've had in modern times, and it was starting to match some of the greats from the 80s. But now it's probably going to end up like those franchises where they are going to milk it dry. The ending of Smile 2 had the perfect setup to keep it going forever, as the entity will never die now. However, if they were to end Smile on this beat and let it rest going forward, I think the quality of the ending and franchise will hold up wonderfully. But this is Paramount, so I don't see a reality where this is the case. So I'm not super confident with the franchise going forward, but I am satisfied with how great it was up until this point. But anyways, that about wraps up my thoughts. Smile 2 was just a great movie, and I firmly believe it was better than the first one, despite some minor complexities. If you haven't seen Smile 2, I 100% recommend you go and see it. Just know that depending on how much of a diehard fan you are, you might feel less than satisfied with the conclusion. I just wanted to talk about this. That's really about it. So...